Everyone, this is Arnold, Leah, and Georgie, and we read the book Sex, Murder, and the Meaning of Life. And throughout the following minutes, we will explain to you Maslow's idea of our hierarchy of needs and a few problems that the author acknowledges it in the chapters. And we also take a closer look at how our mind works and what we remember and might not remember. And the video will end with a question to the author or even to you guys.
Okay, first let's start with some basics. As opposed to his contemporary fellows, behaviorists, Maslow didn't believe that all human motives could ultimately be traced back to primary drives, such as hunger and thirst. He proposed instead that human beings have several completely independent sets of basic motives. At the base of his hierarchy were physiological needs like hunger and thirst. If those needs were satisfied, people naturally move on to worrying about safety. Next in the hierarchy are social motives, the desire to have some friends who will show you affection, followed by the desire to get some respect. And finally, at the top of the pyramid, there is self-actualization, the desire to fulfill your unique potential and whatever you excel at.
Even though the pyramid of Maslow is worth preserving, there are some problems found by the author of this book. First of all, the author mentions that Maslow did not understand the central importance of reproduction to human life and taking care of children. He believed that the motives at the top of the hierarchy are somehow disconnected from biology, but this is simply not true according to the author of this book. Therefore, the author came up with an updated version of the pyramid that you can see here. There are three important differences compared to Maslow's pyramid. Firstly, self-actualization is displaced from its hello position at the top of the pyramid, because it can actually be folded into the self-esteem category. Secondly, there are three new motives that are added, which are all linked to reproduction and are derived from the life history theory that we will explain later in more detail. Mate acquisition, mate retention, and parenting. Lastly, rather than stacking the goals on top of one another, the goals here are overlapping, which means that the higher needs do develop later in life, but are not replaced by the lower ones. From this you can conclude that the earlier developing needs, such as physiological needs, remain important but stay in the background until they are triggered by certain threats of the environment.
We will now explain the functions of self-actualization, physiological needs, safety, social belonging, self-esteem, self-actualization from a more evolutionary perspective. So, physiological needs. The evolutionary function of these needs are survival. For example, pregnant women get particularly cravings for certain foods, but they can get sick of the thought of others, which serves as a survival function for their baby. Second is the safety need, that also serves an obvious and essential survival function, protecting us from potential harm. Because it would have been difficult for our ancestors to survive without friends, social belonging brought a lot of advantages in terms of evolutionary functions, such as sharing food with each other for survival. High self-esteem translates into status in your group, and that translates into more chances of finding a mate. While Maslow displays self-actualization from a hallowed position at the top of the pyramid, the author puts its focal point on the evolutionary function of it. Throughout history, people who perfected their creative performances or showed off their intellectual capacities often gained status, and that often improved their odds of reproducing.
After that, the author explains the life history theory. In general, Maslow sometimes blurred together cognitive priority and developmental priority, even though they do not move in synchrony with one another, according to the author, which can be seen as another point of criticism. In general, the life history theory holds the central assumption that every animal has a limited budget of resources. Consequently, as an animal develops, there are always trade-offs in when and how to allocate those scarce resources. The life history can be divided into two major phases, each involving different trade-offs.
The first phase consists of what we could call development of our bodies. For humans, we do not reach sexual maturity for over a decade. Therefore, meanwhile, we need to take care of physiological needs, protecting ourselves from danger and get a good looking appearance once we reach sexual maturity. And we are ready then for the hunt of a mate.
The second phase is called reproductive effort and can be further divided into mating and parental care. This phase is all about putting effort into ways that will replicate that individual's genes. This theory has inspired the author to add the three phases about mating to the pyramid.
Now let's put some attention to the role of the environment. Maslow's tendency to downplay the environment was linked to a bias in the humanistic movement. Maslow said that a self-actualized person is someone who is independent of the environment, and it is not actually a higher plane of existence to be disconnected from the people around us. Indeed, adults who do not pay any attention to other people's needs may be manifesting more pathology than self-realization. We are our multiple personalities, and each of us is driven by different motivational subsystems. Which one of our subselves comes to the surface depends on what is going on in our current situation.
The next chapter focuses on how our different subselves wrap our mind in different ways depending on the current environment we are in. A question the author was thinking about was, why do we remember certain aspects of our life while forgetting about others immediately?
A computer as an information processing machine is often used as a metaphor to explain how our mind works. First, an array of sensory mechanisms feed a broad stream of information into the brain's attentional filters. The arrows that you can see on the left represent those information. The working brain in the middle represents the attentional filter, which chooses only a small portion of information for conscious attention. After that, only a small percentage of this information is actually stored in the long-term memory. And if this information is extremely important for yourself, it might get privileged processed and may become even a flashbulb memory.
What the mind chooses to prioritize is a question at interface of cognitive science and evolutionary psychology. That's when it comes to selective attention. So, why would it be functional to recognize a man's anger more rapidly than women's? The author says it's because men are potentially violent, so we don't want to miss an angry expression.
Now we're gonna talk about counterfactual thinking. Counterfactual thinking can be described as musings people have about choices they did not make and about how things might have been if they had chosen differently. The author makes a clear distinction between men and women when it comes to thinking about alternative realities, about what it might have been like if we had chosen a different path in our life. When it comes to romantic relationships, men and women were quite different. Women were much more likely than men to regret things they had done. The majority of men's regrets over relationships were about actions they did not take. The author says that from an evolutionary perspective that actually makes sense, because men are more inclined toward promiscuity and women to careful choice. And by remembering, they will do a better job of avoiding those mistakes in the future.
We have now reached the end of the journey, and we came up with a question for Douglas Kendrick. And how would the author of the book explain that some people or couple do not want to expand their family and have kids? And what is their motivation in life other than reproduction? Thank you for attention, and I hope
you liked our beautiful presentation.